The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning, mid-October, with the sun not shining and a look of hard, wet rain in the clearness of the foothills. I was wearing my powder blue suit with dark blue shirt, tie, and display handkerchief, black brogues, black wool socks with dark blue clocks on them. I was neat, clean, shaved, and sober, and I didn't care who knew it. I was everything the well-dressed private detective ought to be. I was calling on $4 million. The main hallway of the Sternwood place was 2 stories high. Over the entrance doors, which would have let in a troop of Indian elephants, there was a broad, stained glass panel showing a knight in dark armor rescuing a lady who was tied to a tree and didn't have any clothes on, but some very long and convenient hair. The knight had pushed the visor of his helmet back to be sociable, and he was fiddling with the knots on the ropes that tied the lady to the tree and not getting anywhere. I stood there and thought that if I lived in the house, I would sooner or later have to climb up there and help him. He didn't seem to be really trying. There were French doors at the back of the hall, beyond them a wide sweep of emerald grass to a white garage, in front of which a slim, dark young chauffeur in shiny black leggings was dusting a maroon Packard convertible. Beyond the garage were some decorative trees trimmed as carefully as poodle dogs. Beyond them a large greenhouse with a domed roof. Then more trees, and beyond everything the solid, uneven, comfortable line of the foothills. On the east side of the hall a free staircase, tile-paved, rose to a gallery with a wrought iron railing and another piece of stained glass romance. Large, hard chairs with rounded red plush seats were backed into the vacant spaces of the wall round about. They didn't look as if anybody had ever sat in them. In the middle of the west wall there was a big empty fireplace with a brass screen in 4 hinged panels, and over the fireplace a marble mantel with cupids at the corners. Above the mantel there was a large oil portrait, and above the portrait 2 bullet-torn or moth-eaten cavalry pennants crossed in a glass frame. The portrait was a stiffly posed job of an officer in full regimentals of about the time of the Mexican War. The officer had a neat black imperial, black mustachios, hot, hard, coal-black eyes, and the general look of a man it would pay to get along with. I thought this must be General Sternwood's grandfather. It could hardly be the general himself, even though I'd heard he was pretty far gone in years to have a couple of daughters still in the dangerous 20s. I was still staring at the hot black eyes when a door opened far back under the stairs. It wasn't the butler coming back, it was a girl. She was 20 or so, small and delicately put together, but she looked durable. She wore pale blue slacks, and they looked well on her. She walked as if she were floating. Her hair was a fine, tawny wave, cut much shorter than the current fashion of pageboy tresses, curled in at the bottom. Her eyes were slate gray and had almost no expression when they looked at me. She came over near me and smiled with her mouth, and she had little sharp, predatory teeth, as white as fresh orange pith and as shiny as porcelain. They glistened between her thin, too-taut lips. Her face lacked color and didn't look too healthy. "Tall, aren't you?" she said. I didn't mean to be. Her eyes rounded. She was puzzled. She was thinking. I could see, even on that short acquaintance, that thinking was always going to be a bother to her. "Handsome, too," she said. "And I bet you know it." I grunted. "What's your name?" "Riley," I said. "Doghouse Riley." "That's a funny name." She bit her lip and turned her head a little and looked at me along her eyes. Then she lowered her lashes until they almost cuddled her cheeks and slowly raised them again, like a theater curtain. I was to get to know that trick. That was supposed to make me roll over on my back with all 4 paws in the air. "Are you a prize fighter?" she asked when I didn't. "Not exactly. I'm a sleuth." She tossed her head angrily, and the rich color of it glistened in the rather dim light of the big hall. "You're making fun of me." "Uh-huh." "What?" "Get on with you," I said. "You heard me." "You didn't say anything. You're just a big tease." She put a thumb up and bit it. It was a curiously shaped thumb, thin and narrow like an extra finger, with no curve in the first joint. She bit it and sucked it slowly, turning it around in her mouth like a baby with a comforter. "You're awfully tall," she said. Then she giggled with secret merriment. Then she turned her body slowly and lithely without lifting her feet. Her hands dropped limp at her sides. She tilted herself towards me on her toes. She fell straight back into my arms. I had to catch her or let her crack her head on the tessellated floor. I caught her under her arms and she went rubber-legged on me instantly. I had to hold her close to hold her up. When her head was against my chest, she screwed it around and giggled at me. "You're cute," she giggled. "I'm cute, too." I didn't say anything. So the butler chose that convenient moment to come back through the French doors and see me holding her. It didn't seem to bother him. He was a tall, thin silver man, 60 or close to it, or a little past it. He had blue eyes as remote as eyes could be. His skin was smooth and bright, and he moved like a man with very sound muscles. He walked slowly across the floor towards us, and the girl jerked away from me. She flashed across the room to the foot of the stairs and went up them like a deer. She was gone before I could draw a long breath and let it out. The butler said tonelessly, "The General will see you now, Mr. Marlowe." I pushed my lower jaw up off my chest and nodded at him. "Who was that?" "Miss Carmen Sternwood, sir." "You ought to wean her. She looks old enough." He looked at me with grave politeness and repeated what he had said. We went out at the French doors and along a smooth red-flagged path that skirted the far side of the lawn from the garage. The boyish-looking chauffeur had a big black and chromium sedan out now and was dusting that. The path took us along to the side of the greenhouse, and the butler opened a door for me and stood aside. It opened into a sort of vestibule that was about as warm as a slow oven. He came in after me, shut the outer door, opened an inner door, and we went through that. Then it was really hot. The air was thick, wet, steamy, and larded with the cloying smell of tropical orchids in bloom. The glass walls and roof were heavily misted, and big drops of moisture splashed down on the plants. The light had an unreal greenish color, like light filtered through an aquarium tank. The plants filled the place, a forest of them, with nasty, meaty leaves and stalks like the newly washed fingers of dead men. They smelled as overpowering as boiling alcohol under a blanket. The butler did his best to get me through without being smacked in the face by the sodden leaves, and after a while we came to a clearing in the middle of the jungle, under the domed roof. Here, in a space of hexagonal flags, an old red Turkish rug was laid down, and on the rug was a wheelchair. And in the wheelchair an old and obviously dying man watched us come with black eyes from which all fire had died long ago, but which still had the coal-black directness of the eyes in the portrait that hung above the mantel in the hall. The rest of his face was a leaden mask, with the bloodless lips and the sharp nose and the sunken temples and the outward-turning earlobes of approaching dissolution. His long, narrow body was wrapped, in that heat, in a traveling rug and a faded red bathrobe. His thin, claw-like hands were folded loosely on the rug, purple-nailed. A few locks of dry white hair clung to his scalp like wild flowers fighting for life on a bare rock. The butler stood in front of him and said, "This is Mr. Marlowe, General." The old man didn't move or speak or even nod. He just looked at me lifelessly. The butler pushed a damp wicker chair against the back of my legs, and I sat down. He took my hat with a deft scoop. Then the old man dragged his voice up from the bottom of a well and said, "Brandy, Norris. How do you like your brandy, sir?" "Any way at all," I said. The butler went away among the abominable plants. The general spoke again, slowly, using his strength as carefully as an out-of-work showgirl uses her last good pair of stockings. "I used to like mine with champagne. The champagne as cold as Valley Forge and about a third of a glass of brandy beneath it. You may take your coat off, sir. It's too hot in here for a man with blood in his veins." I stood up and peeled off my coat and got a handkerchief out and mopped my face and neck and the backs of my wrists. St. Louis in August had nothing on that place. I sat down again, and I felt automatically for a cigarette and then stopped. The old man caught the gesture and smiled faintly. "You may smoke, sir. I like the smell of tobacco. I lit the cigarette and blew a lungful at him, and he sniffed at it like a terrier at a rat hole. The faint smile pulled at the shadowed corners of his mouth. "A nice state of affairs when a man has to indulge his vices by proxy," he said dryly. "You're looking at a very dull survival of a rather gaudy life. A cripple, paralyzed in both legs with only half of his lower belly. There's very little that I can eat, and my sleep is so close to waking that it's hardly worth the name. I seem to exist largely on heat, like a newborn spider, and the orchids are an excuse for the heat. Do you like orchids?" "Not particularly," I said. The general half closed his eyes. "They are nasty things. Their flesh is too much like the flesh of men, and their perfume has the rotten sweetness of a prostitute." I stared at him with my mouth open. The soft, wet heat was like a pall around us. The old man nodded as if his neck was afraid of the weight of his head. Then the butler came pushing back through the jungle with a tea wagon, mixed me a brandy and soda, swathed the copper ice bucket with a damp napkin, and went away softly among the orchids. A door opened and shut behind the jungle. I sipped the drink. The old man licked his lips, watching me, over and over again, drawing one lip slowly across the other with a funeral absorption, like an undertaker dry-washing his hands. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Marlowe. I suppose I have a right to ask?" "Sure, but there's very little to tell. I'm 33 years old, went to college once, and can still speak English if there's any demand for it. There isn't much in my trade. I worked for Mr. Wilde, the district attorney, as an investigator once. His chief investigator, a man named Bernie Oles, called me and told me he wanted to see me. I'm unmarried because I don't like policemen's wives." "And a little bit of a cynic," the old man smiled. "You didn't like working for Wilde?" "I was fired. For insubordination. I test very high on insubordination, General." "I always did myself, sir. I'm glad to hear it. What do you know about my family?" "I'm told you're a widower and have 2 young daughters, both pretty and both wild. One of them's been married 3 times, the last time to an ex-bootlegger who went in the trade by the name of Rusty Regan. That's all I heard, General." "Did any of it strike you as peculiar?" "The Rusty Regan part, maybe. But I always got along with bootleggers myself." He smiled his faint, economical smile. "It seems I do, too. I'm very fond of Rusty. A big, curly-headed Irishman from Clonmel, with sad eyes and a smile as wide as Wilshire Boulevard. The first time I saw him, I thought he might be what you're probably thinking he was, an adventurer who happened to get himself wrapped up in some velvet." "You must have liked him," I said. "You learned to talk the language." He put his thin, bloodless hands under the edge of the rug. I put my cigarette stub out and finished my drink. "He was the breath of life to me, while he lasted. He spent hours with me, sweating like a pig, drinking brandy by the quart, and telling me stories of the Irish Revolution. He'd been an officer in the IRA. He wasn't even legally in the United States. It was a ridiculous marriage, of course, and it probably didn't last a month as a marriage. I'm telling you the family secrets, Mr. Marlowe." "They're still secrets," I said. "What happened to him?" The old man looked at me woodenly. "He went away a month ago. Abruptly, without a word to anyone. Without saying goodbye to me. That hurt a little, but he had been raised in a rough school. I'll hear from him one of these days. Meantime, I'm being blackmailed again." I said, "Again?" He brought his hands from under the rug with a brown envelope in them. I should have been very sorry for anybody who tried to blackmail me while Rusty was around. A few months before he came, that is to say about 9 or 10 months ago, I paid a man named Joe Brody $5,000 to let my younger daughter Carmen alone. "Ah," I said. He moved his thin white eyebrows. "That means what?" "Nothing," I said. He went on staring at me, half frowning. Then he said, "Take this envelope and examine it, and help yourself to the brandy." I took the envelope off his knees and sat down with it again. I wiped off the palms of my hands and turned it around. It was addressed to General Guy Sternwood, 3765 Alta Brea Crescent, West Hollywood, California. The address was in ink, in the slanted printing engineers use. The envelope was slit. I opened it up and took out a brown card and 3 slips of stiff paper. The card was of thin brown linen printed in gold. Mr. Arthur Gwynne Geiger, no address. Very small in the lower left-hand corner, rare books and deluxe editions. I turned the card over. More of the slanted printing on the back. "Dear Sir, in spite of the legal uncollectability of the enclosed, which frankly represent gambling debts, I assume you might wish them honored. Respectfully, A. G. Geiger." I looked at the slips of stiffish white paper. They were promissory notes filled out in ink, dated on several dates early in the month before, September. On demand, I promised to pay to Arthur Gwynne Geiger, or order, the sum of $1,000 without interest. Value received, Carmen Sternwood. The written part was in a sprawling, moronic handwriting with a lot of fat curlicues and circles for dots. I mixed myself another drink and sipped it and put the exhibit aside. "Your conclusions?" the general asked. "I haven't any yet. Who is this Arthur Gwynne Geiger?" "I haven't the faintest idea." "What does Carmen say?" "I haven't asked her. I don't intend to. If I did, she would suck her thumb and look coy." I said, "I met her in the hall. She did that to me. Then she tried to sit in my lap." Nothing changed in his expression. His clasped hands rested peacefully on the edge of the rug, and the heat, which made me feel like a New England boiled dinner, didn't seem to make him even warm. "Do I have to be polite," I asked, "or can I just be natural?" "I haven't noticed that you suffer from many inhibitions, Mr. Marlowe." "Do the 2 girls run around together?" "I think not. I think they go their separate and slightly divergent roads to perdition. Vivian is spoiled, exacting, smart, and quite ruthless. Carmen is a child who likes to pull wings off flies. Neither of them has any more moral sense than a cat. Neither have I. No Sternwood ever had." "Proceed." "They're well educated, I suppose. They know what they're doing." "Vivian went to good schools of the snob type and to college. Carmen went to half a dozen schools of greater and greater liberality and ended up where she started. I presume they both had and still have all the usual vices. If I sound a little sinister as a parent, Mr. Marlowe, it's because my hold on life is too slight to include any Victorian hypocrisy." He leaned his head back and closed his eyes, then opened them again suddenly. "I need not add that a man who indulges in parenthood for the first time at the age of 54 deserves all he gets." I sipped my drink and nodded. The pulse in his lean gray throat throbbed visibly, and yet so slowly that it was hardly a pulse at all. An old man 2/3 dead and still determined to believe he could take it. "Your conclusions," he snapped suddenly. "I'd pay him." "Why?" "It's a question of a little money against a lot of annoyance. There has to be something behind it, but nobody's going to break your heart if it hasn't been done already. And it would take an awful lot of chiselers an awful lot of time to rob you of enough so that you'd even notice it." "I have pride, sir," he said coldly. "Somebody's counting on that. It's the easiest way to fool them, that or the police. Geiger can collect on these notes unless you can show fraud. Instead of that, he makes you a present of them and admits they're gambling debts, which gives you a defense, even if he'd kept the notes. If he's a crook, he knows his onions, and if he's an honest man doing a little loan business on the side, he ought to have his money. Who is this Joe Brody you paid the $5,000 to?" "Some kind of gambler. I hardly recall. Norris would know, my butler." "Your daughters have money in their own right, General?" "Vivian has, but not a great deal." Carmen is still a minor under her mother's will. I give them both generous allowances. I said, I can take this Geiger off your back, General, if that's what you want. Whoever he is and whatever he has. It may cost you a little money besides what you pay me, and of course it won't get you anything. Sugaring them never does. You're already listed on their book of nice names. I see. He shrugged his wide, sharp shoulders in the faded red bathrobe. A moment ago you said pay him. Now you say it won't get me anything. I mean, it might be cheaper and easier to stand for a certain amount of squeeze, that's all. I'm afraid I'm rather an impatient man, Mr. Marlowe. What are your charges? I get $25 a day in expenses, when I'm lucky. I see. It seems reasonable enough for removing morbid growths from people's backs. Quite a delicate operation. You realize that, I hope. You'll make your operation as little of a shock to the patient as possible? There might be several of them, Mr. Marlowe. I finished my second drink and wiped my lips and my face. The heat didn't get any less hot with the brandy in me. The General blinked at me and plucked at the edge of his rug. Can I make a deal with this guy if I think he's within hooting distance of being on the level? Yes. The matter is now in your hands. I never do things by halves. I'll take him out, I said. He'll think a bridge fell on him. I'm sure you will. And now I must excuse myself. I'm tired. He reached out and touched the bell on the arm of his chair. The cord was plugged into a black cable that wound along the side of the deep, dark green boxes in which the orchids grew and festered. He closed his eyes, opened them again in a brief, bright stare, and settled back among his cushions. The lids dropped again, and he didn't pay any more attention to me. I stood up and lifted my coat off the back of the damp wicker chair and went off with it among the orchids, opened the two doors, and stood outside in the brisk October air, getting myself some oxygen. The chauffeur over by the garage had gone away. The butler came along the red path with smooth, light steps and his back as straight as an ironing board. I shrugged into my coat and watched him come. He stopped about 2 feet from me and said gravely, Mrs. Regan would like to see you before you leave, sir. And in the matter of money, the General has instructed me to give you a check for whatever seems desirable. Instructed you how? He looked puzzled. Then he smiled. Ah, I see, sir. You are, of course, a detective. By the way he rang his bell. You write his checks? I have that privilege. That ought to save you from a pauper's grave. No money now, thanks. What does Mrs. Regan want to see me about? His blue eyes gave me a smooth, level look. She has a misconception of the purpose of your visit, sir. Who told her anything about my visit? Her windows command the greenhouse. She saw us go in. I was obliged to tell her who you were. I don't like that, I said. His blue eyes frosted. Are you attempting to tell me my duties, sir? No, but I'm having a lot of fun trying to guess what they are. We stared at each other for a moment. He gave me a blue glare and turned away. This room was too big. The ceiling was too high, the doors were too tall, and the white carpet that went from wall to wall looked like a fresh fall of snow at Lake Arrowhead. There were full-length mirrors and crystal doodads all over the place. The ivory furniture had chromium on it, and the enormous ivory drapes lay tumbled on the white carpet a yard from the windows. The white made the ivory look dirty, and the ivory made the white look bled out. The windows stared towards the darkening foothills. It was going to rain soon. There was pressure in the air already. I sat down on the edge of a deep, soft chair and looked at Mrs. Regan. She was worth a stare. She was trouble. She was stretched out on a modernistic chaise lounge with her slippers off, so I stared at her legs in the sheerest silk stockings. They seemed to be arranged to stare at. They were visible to the knee, and one of them well beyond. The knees were dimpled, not bony and sharp. The calves were beautiful, the ankles long and slim and with enough melodic line for a tone poem. She was tall and rangy and strong-looking. Her head was against an ivory satin cushion. Her hair was black and wiry and parted in the middle, and she had the hot black eyes of the portrait in the hall. She had a good mouth and a good chin. There was a sulky droop to her lips, and the lower lip was full. She had a drink. She took a swallow from it and gave me a cool, level stare over the rim of the glass. "So you're a private detective," she said. "I didn't know they really existed, except in books, or else they were greasy little men snooping around hotels." There was nothing in that for me, so I let it drift with the current. She put her glass down on the flat arm of the chaise longue and flashed an emerald and touched her hair. She said slowly, "How did you like Dad?" "I liked him," I said. "He liked Rusty. I suppose you know who Rusty is." "Uh-huh." Rusty was earthy and vulgar at times, but he was very real, and he was a lot of fun for Dad. Rusty shouldn't have gone off like that. Dad feels very badly about it, although he won't say so. Or did he? He said something about it. "You're not much of a gusher, are you, Mr. Marlowe? But he wants to find him, doesn't he?" I stared at her politely through a pause. "Yes and no," I said. "That's hardly an answer. Do you think you can find him?" I didn't say I was going to try. Why not try the Missing Persons Bureau? They have the organization. It's not a one-man job. Oh, Dad wouldn't hear of the police being brought into it. She looked at me smoothly across her glass again, emptied it, and rang a bell. A maid came into the room by a side door. She was a middle-aged woman with a long, yellow, gentle face, a long nose, no chin, large, wet eyes. She looked like a nice old horse that had been turned out to pasture after long service. Mrs. Regan waved the empty glass at her, and she mixed another drink and handed it to her and left the room, without a word, without a glance in my direction. When the door shut, Mrs. Regan said, "Well, how will you go about it, then?" "How and when did he skip out?" "Didn't Dad tell you?" I grinned at her with my head on one side. She flushed. Her hot black eyes looked mad. "I don't see what there is to be cagey about," she snapped, "and I don't like your manners." "I'm not crazy about yours," I said. "I didn't ask to see you. You sent for me. I don't mind your ritzing me or drinking your lunch out of a Scotch bottle. I don't mind your showing me your legs. They're very swell legs, and it's a pleasure to make their acquaintance. I don't mind if you don't like my manners. They're pretty bad. I grieve over them during the long winter evenings. But don't waste your time trying to cross-examine me." She slammed her glass down so hard that it slopped over on an ivory cushion. She swung her legs to the floor and stood up with her eyes sparking fire and her nostrils wide. Her mouth was open and her bright teeth glared at me. Her knuckles were white. "People don't talk like that to me," she said thickly. I sat there and grinned at her. Very slowly she closed her mouth and looked down at the spilled liquor. She sat down on the edge of the chaise longue and cupped her chin in one hand. "My God, you big, dark, handsome brute. I ought to throw a Buick at you." I snicked a match on my thumbnail, and for once it lit. I puffed smoke into the air and waited. "I loathe masterful men," she said. "I simply loathe them." "Just what is it you're afraid of, Mrs. Regan?" Her eyes whitened. Then they darkened until they seemed to be all pupil. Her nostrils looked pinched. "That wasn't what he wanted with you at all," she said in a strained voice that still had shreds of anger clinging to me. "About Rusty, was it?" "Better ask him." She flared up again. "Get out! Damn you, get out!" I stood up. "Sit down!" she snapped. I sat down. I flicked a finger at my palm and waited. "Please," she said, "please, you could find Rusty, if Dad wanted you to." That didn't work either. I nodded and asked, "When did he go?" "One afternoon a month back. He just drove away in his car without saying a word. They found the car in a private garage somewhere." "They?" She got cunning. Her whole body seemed to go lax. Then she smiled at me winningly. "He didn't tell you then?" Her voice was almost gleeful, as if she'd outsmarted me. Maybe she had. He told me about Mr. Regan, yeah. That's not what he wanted to see me about. Is that what you've been trying to get me to say? I'm sure I don't care what you say. I stood up again. Then I'll be running along. She didn't speak. I went over to the tall white door I'd come in at. When I looked back, she had her lip between her teeth and was worrying it like a puppy at the fringe of a rug. I went out, down the tile staircase to the hall, and the butler drifted out of somewhere with my hat in his hand. I put it on while he opened the door for me. You made a mistake, I said. Mrs. Regan didn't want to see me. He inclined his silver head and said politely, I'm sorry, sir. I make many mistakes. He closed the door against my back. I stood on the step breathing my cigarette smoke and looking down a succession of terraces with flower beds and trimmed trees to the high iron fence with gilt spears that hemmed in the estate. A winding driveway dropped down between retaining walls to the open iron gates. Beyond the fence, the hills sloped for several miles. On this lower level, faint and far off, I could just barely see some of the old wooden derricks of the oil field from which the Sternwoods had made their money. Most of the field was public park now, cleaned up and donated to the city by General Sternwood. But a little of it was still producing in groups of wells pumping 5 or 6 barrels a day. The Sternwoods, having moved up the hill, could no longer smell the stale sump water or the oil, but they could still look out of their front windows and see what had made them rich, if they wanted to. I didn't suppose they would want to. I walked down a brick path from terrace to terrace, followed along inside the fence and so out of the gates to where I'd left my car under a pepper tree on the street. Thunder was crackling in the foothills now, and the sky above them was purple-black. It was going to rain hard. The air had the damp foretaste of rain. I put the top up on my convertible before I started downtown. She had lovely legs. I would say that for her. They were a couple of pretty smooth citizens, she and her father. He was probably just trying me out. The job he'd given me was a lawyer's job. Even if Mr. Arthur Gwynne Geiger, rare books and deluxe editions, turned out to be a blackmailer, it was still a lawyer's job, unless there was a lot more to it than met the eye. At a casual glance, I thought I might have a lot of fun finding out. I drove down to the Hollywood Public Library and did a little superficial research in a stuffy volume called Famous First Editions. Half an hour of it made me need my lunch. A.G. Geiger's place was a store frontage on the north side of the boulevard near Las Palmas. The entrance door was set far back in the middle, and there was a copper trim on the windows, which were backed with Chinese screens, so I couldn't see into the store. There was a lot of Oriental junk in the windows. I didn't know whether it was any good, not being a collector of antiques, except unpaid bills. The entrance door was plate glass, but I couldn't see much through that either because the store was very dim. A building entrance adjoined it on one side, and on the other was a glittering credit jewelry establishment. The jeweler stood in his entrance, teetering on his heels and looking bored, a tall, handsome, white-haired Jew in lean, dark clothes, with about 9 carats of diamond on his right hand. A faint, knowing smile curved his lips when I turned into Geiger's store. I let the door close softly behind me and walked on a thick blue rug that paved the floor from wall to wall. There were blue leather easy chairs with smoke stands beside them. A few sets of tooled leather bindings were set out on narrow polished tables between bookends. There were more tooled bindings in glass cases on the walls. Nice-looking merchandise, the kind a rich promoter would buy by the yard and have somebody paste his bookplate in. At the back there was a grained wood partition with a door in the middle of it, shut. In the corner, made by the partition and one wall, a woman sat behind a small desk with a carved wooden lantern on it. She got up slowly and swayed towards me in a tight black dress that didn't reflect any light. She had long thighs, and she walked with a certain something I hadn't often seen in bookstores. She was an ash blonde with greenish eyes, beaded lashes, hair waved smoothly back from ears in which large jet buttons glittered. Her fingernails were silvered. In spite of her get-up, she looked as if she would have a hall bedroom accent. She approached me with enough sex appeal to stampede a businessman's lunch, and tilted her head to finger a stray, but not very stray, tendril of softly glowing hair. Her smile was tentative, but could be persuaded to be nice. "Was it something?" she inquired. I had my horn-rimmed sunglasses on. I put my voice high and let a bird twitter in it. "Would you happen to have a Ben-Hur 1860? She didn't say, "Huh?" but she wanted to. She smiled bleakly. "A first edition?" "Third," I said, "the one with the erratum on page 116. "I'm afraid not, at the moment." "How about a Chevalier Audubon 1840, the full set, of course?" Not at the moment," she purred harshly. Her smile was now hanging by its teeth and eyebrows and wondering what it would hit when it dropped. "You do sell books," I said in my polite falsetto. She looked me over. No smile now. Eyes medium to hard, pose very straight and stiff. She waved silver fingernails at the glassed-in shelves. "What do they look like? Grapefruit?" she inquired tartly. "Oh, that sort of thing hardly interests me, you know. Probably has duplicate sets of steel engravings, tuppence colored and a penny plain, the usual vulgarity. No, I'm sorry, no." "I see." She tried to jack the smile back up on her face. She was as sore as an alderman with the mumps. "Perhaps Mr. Geiger, but he's not in at the moment." Her eyes studied me carefully. She knew as much about rare books as I knew about handling a flea circus. "He might be in later?" "I'm afraid not until late." "Too bad," I said. "Ah, too bad. I'll sit down and smoke a cigarette in one of these charming chairs. I have rather a blank afternoon. Nothing to think about but my trigonometry lesson." "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course." I stretched out in one and lit a cigarette with the round nickel lighter on the smoking stand. She still stood holding her lower lip with her teeth, her eyes vaguely troubled. She nodded at last, turned slowly, and walked back to her little desk in the corner. From behind the lamp she stared at me. I crossed my ankles and yawned. Her silver nails went out to the cradle phone on the desk, didn't touch it, dropped and began to tap on the desk. Silence for about 5 minutes. The door opened and a tall, hungry-looking bird with a cane and a big nose came in neatly, shut the door behind him against the pressure of the door closer, marched over to the corner and placed a wrapped parcel on the desk. He took a pin-seal wallet with gold corners from his pocket and showed the blonde something. She pressed a button on the desk. The tall bird went to the door in the paneled partition and opened it barely enough to slip through. I finished my cigarette and lit another. The minutes dragged by. Horns tooted and grunted on the boulevard. A big red interurban car grumbled past. A traffic light gonged. The blonde leaned on her elbow and cupped a hand over her eyes and stared at me behind it. The partition door opened and the tall bird with a cane slid out. He had another wrapped parcel the shape of a large book. He went over to the desk and paid money. He left as he had come, walking on the balls of his feet, breathing with his mouth open, giving me a sharp side glance as he passed. I got to my feet, tipped my hat to the blonde, and went out after him. He walked west, swinging his cane in a small, tight arc just above his right shoe. He was easy to follow. His coat was cut from a rather loud piece of horse robe with shoulders so wide that his neck stuck up out of it like a celery stalk, and his head wobbled on it as he walked. He went 1.5 blocks. At the Highland Avenue traffic signal, I pulled up beside him and let him see me. He gave me a casual, then a suddenly sharpened side glance and quickly turned away. We crossed Highland with a green light and made another block. He stretched his long legs and had 20 yards on me at the corner. He turned right. 100 feet up the hill, he stopped and hooked his cane over his arm and fumbled a leather cigarette case out of an inner pocket. He put a cigarette in his mouth, dropped his match, looked back when he picked it up, saw me watching him from the corner, and straightened up as if somebody had booted him from behind. He almost raised dust going up the block, walking with long, gawky strides and jabbing his cane into the sidewalk. He turned left again. He had at least 1/2 block on me when I reached the place where he had turned. He had me wheezing. This was a narrow, tree-lined street with a retaining wall on one side and 3 bungalow courts on the other. He was gone. I loafed along the block, peering this way and that. At the second bungalow court, I saw something. It was called the La Baba, a quiet, dim place with a double row of tree-shaded bungalows. The central walk was lined with Italian cypresses trimmed short and chunky, something the shape of the oil jars in Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. Behind the third jar, a loud patterned sleeve edge moved. I leaned against a pepper tree in the parkway and waited. The thunder in the foothills was rumbling again. The glare of lightning was reflected on piled-up black clouds off to the south. A few tentative raindrops splashed down on the sidewalk and made spots as large as nickels. The air was as still as the air in General Sternwood's orchid house. The sleeve behind the tree showed again, then a big nose and one eye and some sandy hair without a hat on it. The eye stared at me. It disappeared. Its mate reappeared like a woodpecker on the other side of the tree. 5 minutes went by. It got him. His type are half nerves. I heard a match strike and then whistling started. Then a dim shadow slipped along the grass to the next tree. Then he was out on the walk, coming straight towards me, swinging the cane and whistling. A sour whistle with jitters in it. I stared vaguely up at the dark sky. He passed within 10 feet of me and didn't give me a glance. He was safe now. He'd ditched it. I watched him out of sight and went up the central walk of the La Baba and parted the branches of the third cypress. I drew out a wrapped book and put it under my arm and went away from there. Nobody yelled at me. Back on the boulevard, I went into a drugstore phone booth and looked up Mr. Arthur Gwynne Geiger's residence. He lived on Laverne Terrace, a hillside street off Laurel Canyon Boulevard. I dropped my nickel and dialed his number just for fun. Nobody answered. I turned to the classified section and noted a couple of bookstores within blocks of where I was. The first I came to was on the north side, a large lower floor devoted to stationery and office supplies, a mass of books on the mezzanine. It didn't look the right place. I crossed the street and walked 2 blocks east to the other one. This was more like it. A narrowed, cluttered little shop stacked with books from floor to ceiling and 4 or 5 browsers taking their time putting thumb marks on the new jackets. Nobody paid any attention to them. I shoved on back into the store, passed through a partition, and found a small, dark woman reading a law book at a desk. I flipped my wallet open on her desk and let her look at the buzzer pinned to the flap. She looked at it, took her glasses off, and leaned back in her chair. I put the wallet away. She had the fine, drawn face of an intelligent Jewess. She stared at me and said nothing. I said, "Would you do me a favor, a very small favor?" "I don't know. What is it?" She had a smoothly husky voice. "You know Geiger's store across the street, 2 blocks west?" "I think I may have passed it." "It's a bookstore," I said. "Not your kind of bookstore. You know darn well." She curled her lips slightly and said nothing. "You know Geiger by sight?" I asked. I'm sorry, I don't know Mr. Geiger." "Then you couldn't tell me what he looks like?" Her lip curled some more. "Why should I?" "No reason at all. If you don't want to, I can't make you." She looked out through the partition door and leaned back again. "That was a sheriff's star, wasn't it?" "Honorary deputy. Doesn't mean a thing. It's worth a dime cigar." "I see." She reached for a pack of cigarettes and shook one loose and reached for it with her lips. I held a match for her. She thanked me, leaned back again, and regarded me through smoke. She said carefully, "You wish to know what he looks like and you don't want to interview him?" "He's not there," I said. "I presume he will be. After all, it's his store." "I don't want to interview him just yet," I said. She looked out through the open doorway again. I said, "Know anything about rare books?" "You could try me." "Would you have a Ben-Hur 1860 3rd edition, the one with the duplicated line on page 116? She pushed her yellow law book to one side and reached a fat volume up on the desk, leafed it through, found her page, and studied it. "Nobody would," she said without looking up. "There isn't one." "Right. What in the world are you driving at?" The girl in Geiger's store didn't know that. She looked up. "I see. You interest me." Rather vaguely. "I'm a private dick on a case. Perhaps I ask too much. It didn't seem much to me somehow." She blew a soft gray smoke ring and poked her finger through. It came to pieces in frail wisps. She spoke smoothly, indifferently. In his early 40s, I should judge, medium height, fattish, would weigh about 160 pounds. Fat face, Charlie Chan mustache, thick, soft neck, soft all over. Well-dressed, goes without a hat, affects a knowledge of antiques and hasn't any. Oh, yes, his left eye is glass. You'd make a good cop, I said. She put the reference book back on an open shelf at the end of her desk and opened the law book in front of her again. I hope not, she said. She put her glasses on. I thanked her and left. The rain had started. I ran for it with the wrapped book under my arm. My car was on a side street pointing at the boulevard almost opposite Geiger's store. I was well sprinkled before I got there. I tumbled into the car and ran both windows up and wiped my parcel off with my handkerchief. Then I opened it up. I knew about what it would be, of course. A heavy book, well-bound, handsomely printed in hand-set type on fine paper, larded with full-page arty photographs. Photos and letterpress were alike, of an indescribable filth. The book was not new. Dates were stamped on the front end paper, in and out dates. A rent book. A lending library of elaborate smut. I rewrapped the book and locked it up behind the seat. A racket like that out in the open on the boulevard seemed to mean plenty of protection. I sat there and poisoned myself with cigarette smoke and listened to the rain and thought about it. Rain filled the gutters and splashed knee-high off the sidewalk. Big cops and slickers that shone like gun barrels had a lot of fun carrying giggling girls across the bad places. The rain drummed hard on the roof of the car, and the Burbank top began to leak. A pool of water formed on the floorboards for me to keep my feet in. It was too early in the fall for that kind of rain. I struggled into a trench coat and made a dash for the nearest drugstore and bought myself a pint of whiskey. Back in the car, I used enough of it to keep warm and interested. I was long overparked, but the cops were too busy carrying girls and blowing whistles to bother about that. In spite of the rain, or perhaps even because of it, there was business done at Geiger's. Very nice cars stopped in front, and very nice-looking people went in and out with wrapped parcels. They were not all men. He showed about 4 o'clock. A cream-colored coupe stopped in front of the store, and I caught a glimpse of the fat face and the Charlie Chan mustache as he dodged out of it and into the store. He was hatless and wore a belted green leather raincoat. I couldn't see his glass eye at that distance. A tall and very good-looking kid in a jerkin came out of the store and rode the coupe off around the corner and came back walking, his glistening black hair plastered with rain. Another hour went by. It got dark, and the rain-clouded lights of the stores were soaked up by the black street. Streetcar bells jangled crossly. At around 5:15, the tall boy in the jerkin came out of Geiger's with an umbrella and went after the cream-colored coupe. When he had it in front, Geiger came out, and the tall boy held the umbrella over Geiger's bare head. He folded it, shook it off, and handed it into the car. He dashed back into the store. I started my motor. The coupe went west on the boulevard, which forced me to make a left turn and a lot of enemies, including a motorman who stuck his head out into the rain to bawl me out. I was 2 blocks behind the coupe before I got in the groove. I hoped Geiger was on his way home. I caught sight of him 2 or 3 times and then made him turning north into Laurel Canyon Drive. Halfway up the grade, he turned left and took a curving ribbon of wet concrete which was called Laverne Terrace. It was a narrow street with a high bank on one side and a scattering of cabin-like houses built down the slope on the other side, so that their roofs were not very much above road level. Their front windows were masked by hedges and shrubs. Sodden trees dripped all over the landscape. Geiger had his lights on and I hadn't. I speeded up and passed him on a curve, picked a number off a house as I went by and turned at the end of the block. He'd already stopped. His car lights were tilted in at the garage of a small house, with a square box hedge so arranged that it masked the front door completely. I watched him come out of the garage with his umbrella up and go in through the hedge. He didn't act as if he expected anybody to be tailing him. Light went on in the house. I drifted down to the next house above it, which seemed empty but had no signs out. I parked, aired out the convertible, had a drink from my bottle, and sat. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but something told me to wait. Another army of sluggish minutes dragged by. 2 cars came up the hill and went over the crest. It seemed to be a very quiet street. At a little after 6, more bright lights bobbed through the driving rain. It was pitch black by then. A car dragged to a stop in front of Geiger's house. The filaments of its lights glowed dimly and died. The door opened and a woman got out, a small, slim woman in a vagabond hat and a transparent raincoat. She went in through the box maze. A bell rang faintly. Light through the rain, a closing door, silence. I reached a flash out of my car pocket and went downgrade and looked at the car. It was a Packard convertible, maroon or dark brown. The left window was down. I felt for the license holder and poked light at it. The registration read Carmen Sternwood, 3765 Alta Brea Crescent, West Hollywood. I went back to my car again and sat and sat. The top dripped on my knees and my stomach burned from the whiskey. No more cars came up the hill. No lights went on in the house before which I was parked. It seemed like a nice neighborhood to have bad habits in. At 7:20, a single flash of hard white light shot out of Geiger's house, like a wave of summer lightning. As the darkness folded back on it and ate it up, a thin, tinkling scream echoed out and lost itself among the rain-drenched trees. I was out of the car and on my way before the echoes died. There was no fear in the scream. It had a sound of half-pleasurable shock, an accent of drunkenness, an overtone of pure idiocy. It was a nasty sound. It made me think of men in white, and barred windows and hard, narrow cots with leather wrist and ankle straps fastened to them. The Geiger hideaway was perfectly silent again when I hit the gap in the hedge and dodged around the angle that masked the front door. There was an iron ring in a lion's mouth for a knocker. I reached for it. I had hold of it. At that exact instant, as if somebody had been waiting for the cue, 3 shots boomed in the house. There was a sound that might have been a long, harsh sigh, then a soft, messy thump, and then rapid footsteps in the house, going away. The door fronted on a narrow run like a footbridge over a gully that filled the gap between the house wall and the edge of the bank. There was no porch, no solid ground, no way to get around to the back. The back entrance was at the top of a flight of wooden steps that rose from the alley-like street below. I knew this because I heard a clatter of feet on the steps going down. Then I heard the sudden roar of a starting car. It faded swiftly into the distance. I thought the sound was echoed by another car, but I wasn't sure. The house in front of me was silent as a vault. There wasn't any hurry. What was in there was in there. I straddled the fence at the side of the runway and leaned far out to the draped but unscreened French window and tried to look in at the crack where the drapes came together. I saw lamplight on a wall in one end of a bookcase. I got back on the runway and took all of it and some of the hedge and gave the front door the heavy shoulder. This was foolish. About the only part of a California house you can't put your foot through is the front door. All it did was hurt my shoulder and make me mad. I climbed over the railing again and kicked the French window in, used my hat for a glove and pulled out most of the lower small pane of glass. I could now reach in and draw a bolt that fastened the window to the sill. The rest was easy. There was no top bolt. The catch gave. I climbed in and pulled the drapes off my face. Neither of the 2 people in the room paid any attention to the way I came in, although only one of them was dead. It was a wide room, the whole width of the house. It had a low-beamed ceiling and brown plaster walls decked out with strips of Chinese embroidery and Chinese and Japanese prints in grained wood frames. There were low bookshelves. There was a thick, pinkish Chinese rug in which a gopher could have spent a week without showing his nose above the nap. There were floor cushions, bits of odd silk tossed around as if whoever lived there had to have a piece he could reach out and thumb. There was a broad, low divan of old rose tapestry. It had a wad of clothes on it, including lilac-colored silk underwear. There was a big carved lamp on a pedestal, 2 other standing lamps with jade-green shades and long tassels. There was a black desk with carved gargoyles at the corners, and behind it, a yellow satin cushion on a polished black chair with carved arms and back. The room contained an odd assortment of odors, of which the most emphatic at the moment seemed to be the pungent aftermath of cordite and the sickish aroma of ether. On a sort of low dais at one end of the room there was a high-backed teakwood chair in which Miss Carmen Sternwood was sitting on a fringed orange shawl. She was sitting very straight, with her hands on the arms of the chair, her knees close together, her body stiffly erect in the pose of an Egyptian goddess, her chin level, her small bright teeth shining between her parted lips. Her eyes were wide open. The dark slate of the iris had devoured the pupil. They were mad eyes. She seemed to be unconscious, but she didn't have the pose of unconsciousness. She looked as if, in her mind, she was doing something very important and making a fine job of it. Out of her mouth came a tiny chuckling noise which didn't change her expression or even move her lips. She was wearing a pair of long jade earrings. They were nice earrings and had probably cost a couple of $100. She wasn't wearing anything else. She had a beautiful body, small, lithe, compact, firm, rounded. Her skin in the lamplight had the shimmering luster of a pearl. Her legs didn't quite have the raffish grace of Mrs. Regan's legs, but they were very nice. I looked her over without either embarrassment or ruddishness. As a naked girl, she was not there in that room at all. She was just a dope. To me, she was always just a dope. I stopped looking at her and looked at Geiger. He was on his back on the floor, beyond the fringe of the Chinese rug, in front of a thing that looked like a totem pole. It had a profile like an eagle, and its wide, round eye was a camera lens. The lens was aimed at the naked girl in the chair. There was a blackened flash bulb clipped to the side of the totem pole. Geiger was wearing Chinese slippers with thick felt soles, and his legs were in black satin pajamas, and the upper part of him wore a Chinese embroidered coat, the front of which was mostly blood. His glass eye shone brightly up at me and was by far the most lifelike thing about him. At a glance, none of the 3 shots I heard had missed. He was very dead. The flashbulb was the sheet lightning I had seen. The crazy scream was the doped and naked girl's reaction to it. The 3 shots had been somebody else's idea of how the proceedings might be given a new twist. The idea of the lad who'd gone down the back steps and slammed into a car and raced away. I could see merit in his point of view. A couple of fragile gold-veined glasses rested on a red lacquer tray on the end of the black desk, beside a pot-bellied flagon of brown liquid. I took the stopper out and sniffed at it. It smelled of ether and something else, possibly laudanum. I'd never tried the mixture, but it seemed to go pretty well with the Geiger menage. I listened to the rain hitting the roof and the north windows. Beyond was no other sound, no cars, no siren, just the rain beating. I went over to the divan and peeled off my trench coat and pawed through the girl's clothes. There was a pale green rough wool dress of the pull-on type with half sleeves. I thought I might be able to handle it. I decided to pass up her underclothes, not from feelings of delicacy, but because I couldn't see myself putting her pants on and snapping her brassiere. I took the dress over to the teak chair on the dais. Miss Sternwood smelled of ether also, at a distance of several feet. The tinny chuckling noise was still coming from her, and a little froth oozed down her chin. I slapped her face. She blinked and stopped chuckling. I slapped her again. "Come on," I said brightly. "Let's be nice. Let's get dressed." She peered at me, her slaty eyes as empty as holes in a mask. "Goo-goo Tataral," she said. I slapped her around a little more. She didn't mind the slaps. They didn't bring her out of it. I set to work with the dress. She didn't mind that either. She let me hold her arms up, and she spread her fingers out wide as if that was cute. I got her hands through the sleeves, pulled the dress down over her back, and stood her up. She fell into my arms, giggling. I set her back in the chair and got her stockings and shoes on her. "Let's take a little walk," I said. "Let's take a nice little walk." We took a little walk. Part of the time her earrings banged against my chest, and part of the time we did the splits in unison, like adagio dancers. We walked over to Geiger's body and back. I had her look at him. She thought he was cute. She giggled and tried to tell me so, but she just bubbled. I walked her over to the divan and spread her out on it. She hiccuped twice, giggled a little, and went to sleep. I stuffed her belongings into my pockets and went over behind the totem pole thing. The camera was there all right, set inside it, but there was no plate holder in the camera. I looked around on the floor, thinking he might have got it out before he was shot. No plate holder. I took hold of his limp, chilling hand and rolled him a little. No plate holder. I didn't like this development. I went into a hall at the back of the room and investigated the house. There was a bathroom on the right and a locked door, a kitchen at the back. The kitchen window had been jimmied. The screen was gone and the place where the hook had pulled out showed on the sill. The back door was unlocked. I left it unlocked and looked into a bedroom on the left side of the hall. It was neat, fussy, womanish. The bed had a flounced cover. There was perfume on the triple-mirrored dressing table beside a handkerchief, some loose money, a man's brushes, a key holder. A man's clothes were in the closet and a man's slippers under the flounced edge of the bed cover. Mr. Geiger's room. I took the key holder back to the living room and went through the desk. There was a locked steel box in the deep drawer. I used one of the keys on it. There was nothing in it but a blue leather book with an index and a lot of writing in code in the same slanting printing that had written to General Sternwood. I put the notebook in my pocket, wiped the steel box where I touched it, locked the desk up, pocketed the keys, turned the gas logs off in the fireplace, wrapped myself in my coat, and tried to rouse Miss Sternwood. It couldn't be done. I crammed her vagabond hat on her head and swathed her in her coat and carried her out to her car. I went back and put all the lights out and shut the front door, dug her keys out of her bag and started the Packard. We went off down the hill without lights. It was less than 10 minutes' drive to Alta Brea Crescent. Carmen spent them snoring and breathing ether in my face. I couldn't keep her head off my shoulder. It was all I could do to keep it out of my lap. There was dim light behind narrow leaded panes in the side door of the Sternwood mansion. I stopped the Packard under the porte cochere and emptied my pockets out on the seat. The girl snored in the corner, her hat tilted rakishly over her nose, her hands hanging limp in the folds of the raincoat. I got out and rang the bell. Steps came slowly as if from a long, dreary distance. The door opened and the straight, silvery butler looked out at me. The light from the hall made a halo of his hair. He said, "Good evening, sir," politely, and looked past me at the Packard. His eyes came back to look at my eyes. "Is Mrs. Regan in?" "No, sir." "The General is asleep, I hope." "Yes. The evening is his best time for sleeping." "How about Mrs. Regan's maid?" "Matilda?" "She's here, sir." "Better get her down here. The job needs the woman's touch. Take a look in the car and you'll see why." He took a look in the car. He came back. "I see," he said. "I'll get Matilda." "Matilda'll do right by her," I said. "We all try to do right by her," he said. "I guess you've had practice," I said. He let that one go. "Well, good night," I said. "I'm leaving it in your hands." "Very good, sir. May I call you a cab?" "Positively," I said, "not. As a matter of fact, I'm not here. You're just seeing things." He smiled then. He gave me a duck of his head, and I turned and walked down the driveway and out of the gates. 10 blocks of that, winding down curved, rain-swept streets, under the steady drip of trees, past lighted windows and big houses in ghostly, enormous grounds, vague clusters of eaves and gables and lighted windows high on the hillside, remote and inaccessible, like witch houses in a forest. I came out at a service station glaring with wasted light, where a bored attendant in a white cap and a dark blue windbreaker sat hunched on a stool inside the steamed glass reading a paper. I started in, then kept going. I was as wet as I could get already, and on a night like that you can grow a beard waiting for a taxi, and taxi drivers remember. I made it back to Geiger's house in something over half an hour of nimble walking. There was nobody there, no car on the street except my own car in front of the next house. It looked as dismal as a lost dog. I dug my bottle of rye out of it and poured half of what was left down my throat and got inside to light a cigarette. I smoked half of it, threw it away, got out again, and went down to Geiger's. I unlocked the door and stepped into the still, warm darkness and stood there, dripping quietly on the floor and listening to the rain. I groped to a lamp and lit it. The first thing I noticed was that a couple of strips of embroidered silk were gone from the wall. I hadn't counted them, but the spaces of brown plaster stood out naked and obvious. I went a little farther and put another lamp on. I looked at the totem pole. At its foot, beyond the margin of the Chinese rug, on the bare floor, another rug had been spread. It hadn't been there before. Geiger's body had. Geiger's body was gone. That froze me. I pulled my lips back against my teeth and leered at the glass eye in the totem pole. I went through the house again. Everything was exactly as it had been. Geiger wasn't in his flounced bed or under it or in his closet. He wasn't in the kitchen or the bathroom. That left the locked door on the right of the hall. One of Geiger's keys fitted the lock. The room inside was interesting, but Geiger wasn't in it. It was interesting because it was so different from Geiger's room. It was a hard, bare, masculine bedroom with a polished wood floor, a couple of small throw rugs in an Indian design, 2 straight chairs, a bureau in dark-grained wood with a man's toilet set, and 2 black candles and foot-high brass candlesticks. The bed was narrow and looked hard and had a maroon batik cover. The room felt cold. I locked it up again, wiped the knob off with my handkerchief, and went back to the totem pole. I knelt down and squinted along the nap of the rug to the front door. I thought I could see 2 parallel grooves pointing that way as though heels had been dragged. Whoever had done it had meant business. Dead men are heavier than broken hearts. It wasn't the law. They would have been there still, just about getting warmed up with their pieces of string and chalk and their cameras and dusting powders and their nickel cigars. They would have been very much there. It wasn't the killer. He had left too fast. He must have seen the girl. He couldn't be sure she was too batty to see him. He'd be on his way to distant places. I couldn't guess the answer, but it was all right with me if somebody wanted Geiger missing instead of just murdered. It gave me a chance to find out if I could tell it, leaving Carmen Sternwood out. I locked up again, choked my car to life, and rode off home to a shower, dry clothes, and a late dinner. After that, I sat around in the apartment and drank too much hot toddy trying to crack the code in Geiger's blue indexed notebook. All I could be sure of was that it was a list of names and addresses, probably of the customers. There were over 400 of them. That made it a nice racket, not to mention any blackmail angles, and there were probably plenty of those. Any name on the list might be a prospect as the killer. I didn't envy the police their job when it was handed to them. I went to bed full of whiskey and frustration, and dreamed about a man in a bloody Chinese coat who chased a naked girl with long jade earrings while I ran after them and tried to take a photograph with an empty camera. The next morning was bright, clear, and sunny. I woke up with a motorman's glove in my mouth, drank 2 cups of coffee, and went through the morning papers. I didn't find any reference to Mr. Arthur Gwynne Geiger in either of them. I was shaking the wrinkles out of my damp suit when the phone rang. It was Bernie Oles, the DA's chief investigator, who'd given me the lead to General Sternwood. "Well, how's the boy?" he began. He sounded like a man who'd slept well and didn't owe too much money. "I got a hangover," I said. He laughed absently, and then his voice became a shade too casual, a cagey cop voice. "Seen General Sternwood yet?" "Uh-huh." "Done anything for him?" "Too much rain," I answered, if that was an answer. "They seem to be a family things happen to. A big Buick belonging to one of them is washing about in the surf off Lido Fish Pier." I held the telephone tight enough to crack it. I also held my breath. "Yeah," Oles said cheerfully. "A nice new Buick sedan, all messed up with sand and seawater. Oh, I almost forgot. There's a guy inside it." I let my breath out so slowly that it hung on my lip. "Regan?" I asked. "Huh? Who? Oh, you mean the ex-legger the eldest girl picked up and went and married. I never saw him. What would he be doing down there? Quit stalling. What would anybody be doing down there? I don't know, pal. I'm dropping down to look-see. Want to go along? Yeah. Snap it up, he said. I'll be in my hutch. Shaved, dressed, and lightly breakfasted, I was at the Hall of Justice in less than an hour. I rode up to the 7th floor and went along to the group of small offices used by the DA's men. Olds was no larger than the others, but he had it to himself. There was nothing on his desk but a blotter, a cheap pen set, his hat, and one of his feet. He was a medium-sized blondish man with stiff white eyebrows, calm eyes, and well-kept teeth. He looked like anybody you'd pass on the street. I happened to know he had killed 9 men, 3 of them when he was covered, or somebody thought he was. He stood up and pocketed a flat tin of toy cigars called Intractors, jiggled the one in his mouth up and down, and looked at me carefully along his nose with his head thrown back. It's not Regan, he said. I checked. Regan's a big guy, as tall as you and a shade heavier. This is a young kid. I didn't say anything. What made Regan skip out? Olds asked. You interested in that? I don't think so, I said. When a guy out of the liquor traffic marries into a rich family and then waves goodbye to a pretty dame and a couple of million legitimate bucks, that's enough to make even me think. I guess you thought that was a secret. Uh-huh. Okay, keep buttoned, kid. No hard feelings. He came around the desk, tapping his pockets and reaching for his hat. I'm not looking for Regan, I said. He fixed the lock on his door and we went down to the official parking lot and got into a small blue sedan. We drove out Sunset using the siren once in a while to beat a signal. It was a crisp morning with just enough snap in the air to make life seem simple and sweet, if you didn't have too much on your mind. I had. It was 30 miles to Lido on the Coast Highway, the first 10 of them through traffic. Olds made the run in 3/4 of an hour. At the end of that time, we skidded to a stop in front of a faded stucco arch, and I took my feet out of the floorboards and we got out. A long pier railed with white 2x4s stretched seaward from the arch. A knot of people leaned out at the far end, and a motorcycle officer stood under the arch, keeping another group of people from going out on the pier. Cars were parked on both sides of the highway, the usual ghouls of both sexes. Olds showed the motorcycle officer his badge, and we went out on the pier into a loud fish smell which one night's hard rain hadn't even dented. There she is, on the power barge, Olds said, pointing with one of his toy cigars. A low black barge with a wheelhouse like a tug's was crouched against the pilings at the end of the pier. Something that glistened in the morning sunlight was on its deck, with hoist chains still around it. A large black and chromium car. The arm of the hoist had been swung back into position and lowered to deck level. Men stood around the car. We went down slippery steps to the deck. Olds said hello to a deputy in green khaki and a man in plain clothes. The barge crew of 3 men leaned against the front of the wheelhouse and chewed tobacco. One of them was rubbing at his wet hair with a dirty bath towel. That would be the man who had gone down into the water to put the chains on. We looked the car over. The front bumper was bent. One headlight smashed, the other bent up, but the glass still unbroken. The radiator shell had a big dent in it, and the paint and nickel was scratched up all over the car. The upholstery was sodden and black. None of the tires seemed to be damaged. The driver was still draped around the steering post, with his head at an unnatural angle to his shoulders. He was a slim, dark-haired kid who'd been good-looking not so long ago. Now his face was bluish-white, and his eyes were a faint, dull gleam under the lowered lids, and his open mouth had sand in it. On the left side of his forehead there was a dull bruise that stood out against the whiteness of the skin. Olds backed away, made a noise in his throat, and put a match to his little cigar. "What's the story?" The uniformed man pointed up at the rubbernecks on the end of the pier. One of them was fingering a place where the white 2x4s had been broken through in a wide space. The splintered wood showed yellow and clean like fresh-cut pine. "Went through there. Must have hit pretty hard. The rain stopped early down here about 9 p.m. The broken wood's dry inside. That puts it after the rain stopped. She fell in plenty of water not to be banged up worse, not more than half tide or she'd have drifted farther, and not more than half tide going out or she'd have crowded the piles. That makes it around 10 last night. Maybe 9:30, not earlier. She shows under the water when the boys come down to fish this morning, so we get the barge to hoist her out and we find the dead guy." The plainclothesman scuffed at the deck with the toe of his shoe. Oles looked sideways along his eyes at me and twitched his little cigar like a cigarette. "Drunk?" he asked, of nobody in particular. The man who'd been toweling his head went over to the rail and cleared his throat in a loud hawk that made everybody look at him. "Got some sand," he said, and spat. "Not much as the boyfriend got, but some." The uniformed man said, "Could have been drunk. Showing off all alone in the rain. Drunks'll do anything." "Drunk, hell," the plainclothesman said. "The hand throttle's set halfway down, and the guy's been sapped on the side of the head. Ask me, and I'll call it murder." Oles looked at the man with the towel. "What do you think, buddy?" The man with the towel looked flattered. He grinned. "I say suicide, Mac. None of my business, but you ask me, I say suicide. First off, the guy plowed an awful straight furrow down that pier. You can read his tread marks all the way, nearly. That puts it after the rain, like the sheriff said. Then he hit the pier hard and clean, or he don't go through and land right side up. More likely turned over a couple of times. So he had plenty of speed and hit the rail square. That's more than half throttle. He could have done that with his hand falling, and he could have hurt his head falling, too." Oles said, "You got eyes, buddy. Frisked him?" He asked the deputy. The deputy looked at me, then at the crew against the wheelhouse. "Okay, save that," Oles said. A small man with glasses and a tired face and a black bag came down the steps from the pier. He picked out a fairly clean spot on the deck and put the bag down. Then he took his hat off and rubbed the back of his neck and stared out to sea, as if he didn't know where he was or what he had come for. Oles said, "There's your customer, Doc. Dove off the pier last night around 9 to 10. That's all we know." The small man looked in at the dead man morosely. He fingered the head, peered at the bruise on the temple, moved the head around with both hands, felt the man's ribs. He lifted a lax, dead hand and stared at the fingernails. He let it fall and watched it fall. He stepped back and opened his bag and took out a printed pad of DOA forms and began to write over a carbon. "Broken neck's the apparent cause of death," he said, writing, "which means there won't be much water in him, which means he's due to start getting stiff pretty quick now he's out in the air. Better get him out of the car before he does. You won't like doing it after." Oles nodded. "How long dead, Doc?" "I wouldn't know." Oles looked at him sharply and took the little cigar out of his mouth and looked at that sharply. "Pleased to know you, Doc. A coroner's man that can't guess within 5 minutes has me beat." The little man grinned sourly and put his pad in his bag and clipped his pencil back on his vest. "If he ate dinner last night, I'll tell you, if I know what time he ate it. But not within 5 minutes. "How would he get that bruise? Falling?" The little man looked at the bruise again. "I don't think so. That blow came from something covered, and it had already bled subcutaneously while he was alive." "Blackjack, huh?" "Very likely." The little ME's man nodded, picked his bag off the deck, and went back up the steps to the pier. An ambulance was backing into position outside the stucco arch. Oles looked at me and said, "Let's go. Hardly worth the ride, was it?" We went back along the pier and got into Oles's sedan again. He wrestled it around on the highway and drove back towards town along a 3-lane highway washed clean by the rain, past low rolling hills of yellow-white sand terraced with pink moss. Seaward a few gulls wheeled and swooped over something in the surf, and far out a white yacht looked as if it was hanging in the sky. Oles cocked his chin at me and said, "Know him?" "Sure. The Sternwood chauffeur. I saw him dusting that very car out there yesterday." "I don't want to crowd you, Marlowe. Just tell me, did the job have anything to do with him?" "No, I don't even know his name." "Owen Taylor." "How do I know?" "Funny about that. About a year or so back, we had him in the cooler on a Mann Act rap. It seems he run Sturwood's hotcha daughter, the young one, off to Yuma. The sister ran after them and brought them back and had Owen heaved into the icebox. The next day, she comes down to the DA and gets him to beg the kid off with a U.S. cuter. She says the kid meant to marry her sister and wanted to, only the sister can't see it. All she wanted was to kick a few high ones off the bar and have herself a party. So we let the kid go, and then darned if they don't have him come back to work. And a little later, we get the routine report on his prints from Washington, and he's got a prior back in Indiana, attempted holdup 6 years ago. He got off with 6 months in the county jail, the very one Dillinger bust out of. We hand that to the Sternwoods, and they keep him on just the same. What do you think of that? They seem to be a screwy family, I said. Did they know about last night? No, I got to go up against them now. Leave the old man out of it if you can. Why? He has enough troubles and he's sick. You mean Regan? I scowled. I don't know anything about Regan, I told you. I'm not looking for Regan. Regan hasn't bothered anybody that I know of. Oh, Ole said, and stared thoughtfully out to sea, and the sedan nearly went off the road. For the rest of the drive back to town, he hardly spoke. He dropped me off in Hollywood near the Chinese Theater and turned back west to Alta Brea Crescent. I ate lunch at a counter and looked at an afternoon paper and couldn't find anything about Geiger in it. After lunch, I walked east on the boulevard to have another look at Geiger's store. The lean, black-eyed credit jeweler was standing in his entrance in the same position as the afternoon before. He gave me the same knowing look as I turned in. The store looked just the same. The same lamp glowed on the small desk in the corner, and the same ash blonde in the same black suede-like dress got up from behind it and came towards me with the same tentative smile on her face. Was it? She said and stopped. Her silver nails twitched at her side. There was an overtone of strain in her smile. It wasn't a smile at all. It was a grimace. She just thought it was a smile. Back again, I chirped airily and waved a cigarette. Mr. Geiger in today? I'm afraid not. No, I'm afraid not. Let me see. You wanted... I took my dark glasses off and tapped them delicately on the inside of my left wrist. If you can weigh 190 pounds and look like a fairy, I was doing my best. That was just a stall about those first editions, I whispered. I have to be careful. I've got something he'll want, something he's wanted for a long time. The silver fingernails touched the blonde hair over one small jet-buttoned ear. Oh, a salesman, she said. Well, you might come in tomorrow. I think he'll be here tomorrow. Drop the veil, I said. I'm in the business, too. Her eyes narrowed until they were a faint greenish glitter like a forest pool far back in the shadow of trees. Her fingers clawed at her palm. She stared at me and chopped off a breath. Is he sick? I could go up to the house, I said impatiently. I haven't got forever. Her throat jammed. I thought she was going to fall on her nose. Her whole body shivered and her face fell apart like a bride's pie crust. She put it together again slowly, as if lifting a great weight by sheer willpower. The smile came back with a couple of corners badly bent. No, she breathed, no, he's out of town. That wouldn't be any use. Can't you come in tomorrow? I had my mouth open to say something when the partition door opened a foot. The tall, dark, handsome boy in the jerkin looked out, pale-faced and tight-lipped, saw me shut the door quickly again, but not before I'd seen on the floor behind him a lot of wooden boxes lined with newspapers and packed loosely with books. A man in very new overalls was fussing with them. Some of Geiger's stock was being moved out. When the door shut, I put my dark glasses on again and touched my hat. Tomorrow, then. I'd like to give you a card, but you know how it is. Yes, I know how it is. She shivered a little more and made a faint sucking noise between her bright lips. I went out of the store and west on the boulevard to the corner, and north on the street to the alley which ran behind the stores. A small black truck with wire sides and no lettering on it was backed up to Geiger's place. The man in the very new overalls was just heaving a box up on the tailboard. I went back to the boulevard and along the block next to Geiger's and found a taxi standing at a fire plug. A fresh-faced kid was reading a horror magazine behind the wheel. I leaned in and showed him $1. Tail job? He looked me over. Cop? Private. He grinned. My meat, Jack. He tucked the magazine over his rear-view mirror and I got into the cab. We went around the block and pulled up across from Geiger's alley beside another fire plug. There were about a dozen boxes on the truck when the man in overalls closed the screen doors and hooked the tailboard up and got in behind the wheel. Take him, I told my driver. The man in overalls gunned his motor, shot a glance up and down the alley, and ran away fast in the other direction. He turned left out of the alley. We did the same. I caught a glimpse of the truck turning east on Franklin and told my driver to close in a little. He didn't or couldn't do it. I saw the truck 2 blocks away when we got to Franklin. We had it in sight to Vine and across Vine and all the way to Western. We saw it twice after Western. There was a lot of traffic, and the fresh-faced kid tailed from too far back. I was telling him about that without mincing words when the truck, now far ahead, turned north again. The street at which it turned was called Brittany Place. When we got to Brittany Place, the truck had vanished. The fresh-faced kid made comforting sounds at me through the panel, and we went up the hill at 4 miles an hour, looking for the truck behind bushes. 2 blocks up, Brittany Place swung to the east and met Randall Place in a tongue of land on which there was a white apartment house with its front on Randall Place and its basement garage opening on Brittany. We were going past that, and the fresh-faced kid was telling me the truck couldn't be far away when I looked through the arched entrance of the garage and saw it, back in the dimness with its rear doors open again. We went around to the front of the apartment house, and I got out. There was nobody in the lobby, no switchboard. A wooden desk was pushed back against the wall beside a panel of gilt mailboxes. I looked the names over. A man named Joseph Brody had apartment 405. A man named Joe Brody had received $5,000 from General Sternwood to stop playing with Carmen and find some other little girl to play with. It could be the same Joe Brody. I felt like giving odds on it. I went around an elbow of wall to the foot of tiled stairs and the shaft of the automatic elevator. The top of the elevator was level with the floor. There was a door beside the shaft lettered Garage. I opened it and went down narrow steps to the basement. The automatic elevator was propped open, and the man in new overalls was grunting hard as he stacked heavy boxes in it. I stood beside him and lit a cigarette and watched him. He didn't like my watching him. After a while, I said, "Watch the weight, Bud. She's only tested for half a ton. Where's the stuff going?" "Brody, 405, he grunted. "Manager?" "Yeah, looks like a nice lot of loot." He glared at me with pale, white-rimmed eyes. "Books," he snarled. 100 pounds a box, easy, and me with a 75-pound back. "Well, watch the weight," I said. He got into the elevator with 6 boxes and shut the doors. I went back up the steps to the lobby and out to the street, and the cab took me downtown again to my office building. I gave the fresh-faced kid too much money, and he gave me a dog-eared business card, which for once I didn't drop into the Mayolika jar of sand beside the elevator bank. I had a room and a half on the 7th floor at the back. The half room was an office split in 2 to make reception rooms. Mine had my name on it and nothing else, and that only on the reception room. I always left this unlocked in case I had a client, and the client cared to sit down and wait. I had a client. She wore brownish speckled tweeds, a mannish shirt and tie, hand-carved walking shoes. Her stockings were just as sheer as the day before, but she wasn't showing as much of her legs. Her black hair was glossy under a brown Robin Hood hat that might have cost $50 and looked as if you could have made it with one hand out of a desk blotter. "Well, you do get up," she said, wrinkling her nose at the faded red settee, the 2 odd semi-easy chairs, the net curtains that needed laundering, and the boys'-size library table with the venerable magazines on it to give the place a professional touch. "I was beginning to think perhaps you worked in bed, like Marcel Proust." "Who's he?" I put a cigarette in my mouth and stared at her. She looked a little pale and strained, but she looked like a girl who could function under a strain. "A French writer, a connoisseur in degenerates. You wouldn't know him." "Tut, tut," I said. "Come into my boudoir." She stood up and said, "We didn't get along very well yesterday. Perhaps I was rude." "We were both rude," I said. I unlocked the communicating door and held it for her. We went into the rest of my suite, which contained a rust-red carpet, not very young, 5 green filing cases, 3 of them full of California climate, an advertising calendar showing the Quints rolling around on a sky-blue floor in pink dresses, with seal-brown hair and sharp black eyes as large as mammoth prunes. There were 3 near-walnut chairs, the usual desk with the usual blotter, pen set, ashtray, and telephone, and the usual squeaky swivel chair behind it. "You don't put on much of a front," she said, sitting down at the customer's side of the desk. I went over to the mail slot and picked up 6 envelopes, 2 letters and 4 pieces of advertising matter. I hung my hat on the telephone and sat down. "Neither do the Pinkertons," I said. "You can't make much money at this trade if you're honest. If you have a front, you're making money, or expect to." "Oh, are you honest?" she asked and opened her bag. She picked a cigarette out of a French enamel case, lit it with a pocket lighter, dropped case and lighter back into the bag, and left the bag open. Painfully. "How did you get into this slimy kind of business, then?" "How did you come to marry a bootlegger?" "My God, let's not start quarreling again. I've been trying to get you on the phone all morning, here and at your apartment." "About Owen?" Her face tightened sharply. Her voice was soft. "Poor Owen," she said. "So you know about that?" "A DA's man took me down to Lido. He thought I might know something about it, but he knew much more than I did. He knew Owen wanted to marry your sister, once." She puffed silently at her cigarette and considered me with steady black eyes. "Perhaps it wouldn't have been a bad idea," she said quietly. "He was in love with her. We don't find much of that in our circle." "He had a police record." She shrugged. She said negligently, "He didn't know the right people. That's all a police record means in this rotten, crime-ridden country." I wouldn't go that far. She peeled her right glove off and bit her index finger at the first joint, looking at me with steady eyes. "I didn't come to see you about Owen. Do you feel yet that you can tell me what my father wanted to see you about?" "Not without his permission." "Was it about Carmen?" "I can't even say that." I finished filling a pipe and put a match to it. She watched the smoke for a moment. Then her hand went into her open bag and came out with a thick white envelope. She tossed it across the desk. "You'd better look at it anyway," she said. I picked it up. The address was typewritten to Mrs. Vivian Regan, 3765 Alta Brea Crescent, West Hollywood. Delivery had been by messenger service, and the office stamp showed 8:35 a.m. as the time out. I opened the envelope and drew out the shiny 4 1/4 by 3 1/4 photo that was all there was inside. It was Carmen sitting in Geiger's high-backed teakwood chair on the dais, in her earrings and her birthday suit. Her eyes looked even a little crazier than I remembered them. The back of the photo was blank. I put it back in the envelope. "How much do they want?" I asked. $5,000, for the negative and the rest of the prints. The deal has to be closed tonight, or they give the stuff to some scandal sheet. The demand came how? A woman telephoned me about half an hour after this thing was delivered. There's nothing in the scandal sheet angle. Juries convict without leaving the box on that stuff nowadays. What else is there? Does there have to be something else? Yeah. She stared at me a little puzzled. There is. The woman said there was a police jam connected with it, and I'd better lay it on the line fast, or I'd be talking to my little sister through a wire screen. Better, I said. What kind of jam? I don't know. Where's Carmen now? She's at home. She was sick last night. She's still in bed, I think. Did she go out last night? No. I was out, but the servants say she wasn't. I was down at Las Olindas playing roulette at Eddie Mars's Cypress Club. I lost my shirt. So, you liked roulette? You would. She crossed her legs and lit another cigarette. Yes, I like roulette. All the Sternwoods like losing games, like roulette, and marrying men that walk out on them and riding steeplechases at 58 years old and being rolled on by a jumper and crippled for life. The Sternwoods have money. All it's brought them is a rain check. What was Owen doing last night with your car? Nobody knows. He took it without permission. We always let him take a car on his night off, but last night wasn't his night off. She made a wry mouth. Do you think? He knew about this nude photo? How would I be able to say? I don't rule him out. Can you get $5,000 in cash right away? Not unless I tell Dad. Or borrow it. I could probably borrow it from Eddie Mars. He ought to be generous with me, heaven knows. Better try that. You may need it in a hurry. She leaned back and hung an arm over the back of the chair. How about telling the police? It's a good idea, but you won't do it. Won't I? No. You have to protect your father and your sister. You don't know what the police might turn up. It might be something they couldn't sit on, though they usually try in blackmail cases. Can you do anything? I think I can, but I can't tell you why or how. I like you, she said suddenly. You believe in miracles. Would you have a drink in the office? I unlocked my deep drawer and got out my office bottle and 2 pony glasses. I filled them and we drank. She snapped her bag shut and pushed her chair back. I'll get the $5,000, she said. I've been a good customer of Eddie Mara's. There's another reason why he should be nice to me, which you may not know. She gave me one of those smiles the lips have forgotten before they reach the eyes. Eddie's blonde wife is the lady Rusty ran away with. I didn't say anything. She stared tightly at me and added, That doesn't interest you? It ought to make it easier to find him, if I was looking for him. You don't think he's in this mess, do you? She pushed her empty glass at me. Give me another drink. You're the hardest guy to get anything out of. You don't even move your ears. I filled the little glass. You've got all you wanted out of me. A pretty good idea I'm not looking for your husband. She put the drink down very quickly. It made her gasp, or gave her an opportunity to gasp. She let a breath out slowly. Rusty was no crook. If he had been, it wouldn't have been for nickels. He carried $15,000 in bills. He called it his mad money. He had it when I married him, and he had it when he left me. No, Rusty's not in on any cheap blackmail racket. She reached for the envelope and stood up. I'll keep in touch with you, I said. If you want to leave me a message, the phone girl at my apartment house will take care of it. We walked over to the door. Tapping the white envelope against her knuckles, she said, You still feel you can't tell me what Dad? I'd have to see him first. She took the photo out and stood looking at it just inside the door. She has a beautiful little body, hasn't she? Uh-huh. She leaned a little towards me. You ought to see mine, she said gravely. Can it be arranged? She laughed suddenly and sharply and went halfway through the door, then turned her head to say coolly, You're as cold-blooded a beast as I ever met, Marlowe. Or can I call you Phil? Sure. You can call me Vivian. Thanks, Mrs. Regan. Oh, go to hell, Marlowe. She went on out and didn't look back. I let the door shut and stood with my hand on it, staring at the hand. My face felt a little hot. I went back to the desk and put the whiskey away and rinsed out the 2 pony glasses and put them away. I took my hat off the phone and called the DA's office and asked for Bernie Oles. He was back in his cubbyhole. Well, I let the old man alone, he said. The butler said he or one of the girls would tell him. This Owen Taylor lived over the garage, and I went through his stuff. Parents at Dubuque, Iowa. I wired the chief of police there to find out what they want done. The Sternwood family will pay for it. Suicide? I asked. No can tell. He didn't leave any notes. He had no leave to take the car. Everybody was home last night but Mrs. Regan. She was down at Las Olindas with a playboy named Larry Cobb. I checked on that. I know a lad on one of the tables. You ought to stop some of that flash gambling, I said. With the syndicate we got in this county? Be your age, Marlowe. That sap mark on the boy's head bothers me. Sure you can't help me on this? I liked his putting it that way. It let me say no without actually lying. We said goodbye and I left the office, bought all 3 afternoon papers, and rode a taxi down to the Hall of Justice to get my car out of the lot. There was nothing in any of the papers about Geiger. I took another look at his blue notebook, but the code was just as stubborn as it had been the night before. The trees on the upper side of Laverne Terrace had fresh green leaves after the rain. In the cool afternoon sunlight, I could see the steep drop of the hill and the flight of steps down which the killer had run after his 3 shots in the darkness. 2 small houses fronted on the street below. They might or might not have heard the shots. There was no activity in front of Geiger's house or anywhere along the block. The box hedge looked green and peaceful, and the shingles on the roof were still damp. I drove past slowly, gnawing at an idea. I hadn't looked in the garage the night before. Once Geiger's body slipped away, I hadn't really wanted to find it. It would force my hand. but dragging him to the garage to his own car and driving that off into one of the 100 odd lonely canyons around Los Angeles would be a good way to dispose of him for days or even for weeks. That supposed two things: a key to his car and two in the party. It would narrow the sector of search quite a lot, especially as I had had his personal keys in my pocket when it happened. I didn't get a chance to look at the garage. The doors were shut and padlocked, and something moved behind the hedge as I drew level. A woman in a green and white check coat and a small button of a hat on soft blonde hair stepped out of the maze and stood looking wild-eyed at my car, as if she hadn't heard it come up the hill. Then she turned swiftly and dodged back out of sight. It was Carmen Sternwood, of course. I went on up the street and parked and walked back. In the daylight, it seemed an exposed and dangerous thing to do. I went in through the hedge. She stood there, straight and silent against the locked front door. One hand went slowly up to her teeth, and her teeth bit at her funny thumb. There were purple smears under her eyes, and her face was gnawed white by nerves. She half smiled at me. She said hello in a thin, brittle voice. What? That tailed off, and she went back to the thumb. Remember me, I said, Doghouse Riley, the man that grew too tall? Remember? She nodded, and a quick, jerky smile played across her face. Let's go in, I said. I've got a key. Swell, huh? What? I pushed her to one side and put the key in the door, and opened it and pushed her in through it. I shut the door again and stood there, sniffing. The place was horrible by daylight. The Chinese junk on the walls, the rug, the fussy lamps, the teakwood stuff, the sticky riot of colors, the totem pole, the flagon of ether and laudanum. All this in the daytime had a stealthy nastiness, like a fag party. The girl and I stood looking at each other. She tried to keep a cute little smile on her face, but her face was too tired to be bothered. It kept going blank on her. The smile would wash off like water off sand, and her pale skin had a harsh, granular texture under the stunned and stupid blankness of her eyes. A whitish tongue licked at the corners of her mouth. A pretty, spoiled, and not very bright little girl who had gone very, very wrong, and nobody was doing anything about it. To hell with the rich. They made me sick. I rolled a cigarette in my fingers and pushed some books out of the way and sat on the end of the black desk. I lit my cigarette, puffed a plume of smoke, and watched the thumb and tooth act for a while in silence. Carmen stood in front of me like a bad girl in the principal's office. "What are you doing here?" I asked her finally. She picked at the cloth of her coat and didn't answer. "How much do you remember of last night?" She answered that with a foxy glitter rising at the back of her eyes. "Remember what? I was sick last night. I was home." Her voice was a cautious, throaty sound that just reached my ears. "Like hell you were." Her eyes flicked up and down very swiftly. "Before you went home," I said. "Before I took you home. Here, in that chair," I pointed to it. "On that orange shawl. You remember all right." A slow flush crept up her throat. That was something. She could blush. A glint of white showed under the clogged gray irises. She chewed hard on her thumb. "You were the one?" she breathed. "Me. How much of it stays with you?" She said vaguely, "Are you the police?" "No. I'm a friend of your father's." "You're not the police?" "No." She let out a thin sigh. What do you want?" "Who killed him?" Her shoulders jerked, but nothing more moved in her face. "Who else knows?" "About Geiger? I don't know. Not the police, or they'd be camping here. Maybe Joe Brody. It was a stab in the dark, but it got a yelp out of her." "Joe Brody. Him." Then we were both silent. I dragged at my cigarette and she ate her thumb. "Don't get clever, for God's sake," I urged her. "This is a spot for a little old-fashioned simplicity. Did Brody kill him?" "Kill who?" "Oh, Christ," I said. She looked hurt. Her chin came down an inch. "Yes," she said solemnly. "Joe did it." "Why?" "I don't know." She shook her head, persuading herself that she didn't know. Seen much of him lately? Her hands went down and made small white knots. Just once or twice. I hate him. Then you know where he lives. Yes. And you don't like him anymore? I hate him. Then you'd like him for the spot. A little blank again. I was going too fast for her. It was hard not to. Are you willing to tell the police it was Joe Brody? I probed. Sudden panic flamed all over her face. If I can kill the nude photo angle, of course, I added soothingly. She giggled. That gave me a nasty feeling. If she'd screeched or wept or even nosedived to the floor in a dead faint, that would have been all right. She just giggled. It was suddenly a lot of fun. She had had her photo taken as Isis, and somebody had swiped it, and somebody had bumped Geiger off in front of her, and she was drunker than a Legion convention, and it was suddenly a lot of nice, clean fun. So she giggled. Very cute. The giggles got louder and ran around the corners of the room like rats behind the wainscoting. She started to go hysterical. I slid off the desk and stepped up close to her and gave her a smack on the side of the face. Just like last night, I said. We're a scream together. Riley and Sternwood, two stooges in search of a comedian. The giggles stopped dead, but she didn't mind the slap any more than last night. Probably all her boyfriends got around to slapping her sooner or later. I could understand how they might. I sat down on the end of the black desk again. Your name isn't Riley, she said seriously. It's Philip Marlowe. You're a private detective, Viv told me. She showed me your card. She smoothed the cheek I'd slapped. She smiled at me as if I was nice to be with. Well, you do remember, I said, and you came back to look for that photo when you couldn't get into the house, didn't you? Her chin ducked down and up. She worked the smile. I was having the eye put on me. I was being brought into camp. I was going to yell yippee in a minute and ask her to go to Yuma. The photo's gone, I said. I looked last night before I took you home. Probably Brody took it with him. You're not kidding me about Brody? She shook her head earnestly. It's a pushover, I said. You don't have to give it another thought. Don't tell a soul you were here last night or today, not even Vivian. Just forget you were here. Leave it to Riley. Your name isn't, she began, and then stopped and shook her head vigorously in agreement with what I had said or with what she had just thought of. Her eyes became narrow and almost black, and as shallow as enamel on a cafeteria tray. She had had an idea. I have to go home now, she said, as if we had been having a cup of tea. Sure. I didn't move. She gave me another cute glance and went on towards the front door. She had her hand on the knob when we both heard a car coming. She looked at me with questions in her eyes. I shrugged. The car stopped right in front of the house. Terror twisted her face. There were steps, and the bell rang. Carmen stared back at me over her shoulder, her hand clutching the doorknob, almost drooling with fear. The bell kept on ringing. Then the ringing stopped. A key tickled at the door, and Carmen jumped away from it and stood frozen. The door swung open. A man stepped through it briskly and stopped dead, staring at us quietly with complete composure. He was a gray man, all gray, except for his polished black shoes and two scarlet diamonds in his gray satin tie that looked like the diamonds on roulette layouts. His shirt was gray and his double-breasted suit of soft, beautifully cut flannel. Seeing Carmen, he took a gray hat off, and his hair underneath it was gray, and as fine as if it had been sifted through gauze. His thick gray eyebrows had that indefinably sporty look. He had a long chin, a nose with a hook to it, thoughtful gray eyes that had a slanted look because the fold of skin over his upper lid came down over the corner of the lid itself. He stood there politely, one hand touching the door at his back, the other holding the gray hat and flapping it gently against his thigh. He looked hard, not the hardness of a tough guy, more like the hardness of a well-weathered horseman, but he was no horseman. He was Eddie Mars. He pushed the door shut behind him and put that hand in the lap-seamed pocket of his coat and left the thumb outside to glisten in the rather dim light of the room. He smiled at Carmen. He had a nice, easy smile. She licked her lips and stared at him. The fear went out of her face. She smiled back. "Excuse the casual entrance," he said. "The bell didn't seem to rouse anybody. Is Mr. Geiger around?" I said, "No. We don't know just where he is. We found the door a little open. We stepped inside." He nodded and touched his long chin with the brim of his hat. "You're friends of his, of course?" "Just business acquaintances. We dropped by for a book." "A book, huh?" He said that quickly and brightly, and I thought a little slyly, as if he knew all about Geiger's books. Then he looked at Carmen again and shrugged. I moved towards the door. "We'll trot along now," I said. I took hold of her arm. She was staring at Eddie Mars. She liked him. "Any message if Geiger comes back?" Eddie Mars asked gently. "We won't bother you." "That's too bad," he said, with too much meaning. His gray eyes twinkled and then hardened as I went past him to open the door. He added in a casual tone, "The girl can dust. I'd like to talk to you a little, soldier." I let go of her arm. I gave him a blank stare. "Kidder, eh?" he said nicely. "Don't waste it. I've got 2 boys outside in a car that always do just what I want them to do." Carmen made a sound at my side and bolted through the door. Her steps faded rapidly downhill. I hadn't seen her car, so she must have left it down below. I started to say, "What the hell?" "Oh, skip it," Eddie Mars sighed. "There's something wrong around here. I'm going to find out what it is. If you want to pick lead out of your belly, get in my way." "Well, well," I said, "a tough guy." "Only when necessary, soldier." He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was walking around the room, frowning, not paying any attention to me. I looked out above the broken pane of the front window. The top of a car showed over the hedge, its motor idled. Eddie Mars found the purple flagon and the 2 gold-veined glasses on the desk. He sniffed at one of the glasses, then at the flagon. A disgusted smile wrinkled his lips. "The lousy pimp," he said tonelessly. He looked at a couple of books, grunted, went on around the desk and stood in front of the little totem pole with the camera eye. He studied it, dropped his glance to the floor in front of it. He moved the small rug with his foot, then bent swiftly, his body tense. He went down on the floor with one gray knee. The desk hid him from me partly. There was a sharp exclamation, and he came up again. His arm flashed under his coat, and a black Luger appeared in his hand. He held it in long brown fingers, not pointing it at me, not pointing it at anything. "Blood," he said, "blood on the floor there under the rug. Quite a lot of blood." "Is that so?" I said, looking interested. He slid into the chair behind the desk and hooked the mulberry-colored phone towards him and shifted the Luger to his left hand. He frowned sharply at the telephone, bringing his thick gray eyebrows close together and making a hard crease in the weathered skin at the top of his hooked nose. "I think we'll have some law," he said. I went over and kicked at the rug that lay where Geiger had lain. "It's old blood," I said, "dried blood." "Just the same, we'll have some law." "Why not?" I said. His eyes went narrow. The veneer had flaked off him, leaving a well-dressed hard boy with a Luger. He didn't like my agreeing with him. "Just who the hell are you, soldier?" "Marlowe's the name. I'm a sleuth." "Never heard of you. Who's the girl?" "Client. Geiger was trying to throw a loop on her with some blackmail. We came to talk it over. He wasn't here. The door being open, we walked in to wait. Or did I tell you that?" "Convenient," he said, "the door being open, when you didn't have a key." "Yeah. How come you had a key?" "Is that any of your business, soldier?" "I could make it my business." He smiled tightly and pushed his hat back on his gray hair. "And I could make your business my business." "You wouldn't like it. The pay's too small." "All right, Bright Eyes, I own this house. Geiger is my tenant. Now what do you think of that?" "You know such lovely people." "I take 'em as they come. They come all kinds." He glanced down at the Luger, shrugged, and tucked it back under his arm. "Got any good ideas, soldier?" "Lots of 'em. Somebody gunned Geiger. Somebody got gunned by Geiger who ran away. Or it was 2 other fellows. Or Geiger was running a cult and made blood sacrifices in front of that totem pole. Or he had chicken for dinner and liked to kill his chickens in the front parlor." The gray man scowled at me. I give up, I said. Better call your friends downtown. I don't get it, he snapped. I don't get your game here. Go ahead, call the buttons. You'll get a big reaction from it. He thought that over without moving. His lips went back against his teeth. I don't get that either, he said tightly. Maybe it just isn't your day. I know you, Mr. Morris. The Cypress Club at Las Olindas. Flash gambling for flash people. The local law in your pocket and a well-greased line into L.A. In other words, protection. Geiger was in a racket that needed that too. Perhaps you spared him a little now and then, seeing he's your tenant. His mouth became a hard white grimace. Geiger was in what racket? The smut book racket. He stared at me for a long, level minute. Somebody got to him, he said softly. You know something about it. He didn't show at the store today. They don't know where he is. He didn't answer the phone here. I came up to see about it. I find blood on the floor under a rug, and you and a girl here. A little weak, I said, but maybe you can sell the story to a willing buyer. You missed a little something, though. Somebody moved his books out of the store today, the nice books he rented out. He snapped his fingers sharply and said, I should have thought of that, soldier. You seem to get around. How do you figure it? I think Geiger was rubbed. I think that's his blood, and the books being moved out gives a motive for hiding the body for a while. Somebody's taking over the racket and wants a little time to organize. They can't get away with it, Eddie Morris said grimly. Who says so? You and a couple of gunmen in your car outside? This is a big town now, Eddie. Some very tough people have checked in here lately. The penalty of growth. You talk too damn much, Eddie Morris said. He bared his teeth and whistled twice, sharply. A car door slammed outside and running steps came through the hedge. Mars flicked the Luger out again and pointed it at my chest. Open the door. The knob rattled and a voice called out. I didn't move. The muzzle of the Luger looked like the mouth of the 2nd Street Tunnel, but I didn't move. Not being bulletproof is an idea I had had to get used to. Open it yourself, Eddie. Who the hell are you to give me orders? Be nice, and I might help you out. He came to his feet rigidly and moved around the end of the desk and over to the door. He opened it without taking his eyes off me. 2 men tumbled into the room, reaching busily under their arms. One was an obvious pug, a good-looking, pale-faced boy with a bad nose and one ear like a club stake. The other man was slim, blond, deadpan, with close-set eyes and no color in them. Eddie Morris said, See if this bird's wearing any iron. The blonde flicked a short-barreled gun out and stood pointing it at me. The pug sidled over flat-footed and felt my pockets with care. I turned around for him, like a bored beauty modeling an evening gown. No gun, he said in a burry voice. Find out who he is. The pug slipped a hand into my breast pocket and drew out my wallet. He flipped it open and studied the contents. Name's Philip Marlowe, Eddie. Lives at the Hobart Arms on Franklin. Private license, deputy's badge and all. A Seamus. He slipped the wallet back in my pocket, slapped my face lightly, and turned away. Beat it, Eddie Morris said. The 2 gunmen went out again and closed the door. There was the sound of them getting back into the car. They started its motor and kept it idling once more. All right, talk, Eddie Morris snapped. The peaks of his eyebrows made sharp angles against his forehead. I'm not ready to give out. Killing Geiger to grab his racket would be a dumb trick, and I'm not sure it happened that way, assuming he has been killed. But I'm sure that whoever got the books knows what's what, and I'm sure that the blonde lady down at his store is scared batty about something or other. And I have a guess who got the books. Who? That's the part I'm not ready to give out. I got a client, you know. He wrinkled his nose. That, he chopped it off quickly. I expected you'd know the girl, I said. Who got the books, soldier? Not ready to talk, Eddie. Why should I? He put the Luger down on the desk and slapped it with his open palm. This, he said. And I might make it worth your while. That's the spirit. Leave the gun out of it. I can always hear the sound of money. How much you clinking at me? For doing what? What did you want done? He slammed the desk hard. Listen, soldier, I ask you a question and you ask me another. We're not getting anywhere. I want to know where Geiger is for my own personal reasons. I didn't like his racket and I didn't protect him. I happen to own this house. I'm not so crazy about that right now. I can believe that whatever you know about all this is under glass, or there'd be a flock of Johns squeaking sole leather around this dump. You haven't got anything to sell. My guess is you need a little protection yourself, so cough up." It was a good guess, but I wasn't going to let him know it. I lit a cigarette and blew the match out and flicked it at the glass eye of the totem pole. "You're right," I said. "If anything has happened to Geiger, I'll have to give what I have to the law, which puts it in the public domain and doesn't leave me anything to sell. So with your permission, I'll just drift." His face whitened under the tan. He looked mean, fast, and tough for a moment. He made a movement to lift the gun. I added casually, "By the way, how is Mrs. Mars these days?" I thought for a moment I'd kidded him a little too far. His hand jerked at the gun, shaking. His face was stretched out by hard muscles. "Beat it," he said quite softly. "I don't give a damn where you go or what you do when you get there. Only take a word of advice, soldier. Leave me out of your plans or you'll wish your name was Murphy and you lived in Limerick." "Well, that's not so far from Clonmel," I said. "I hear you had a pal came from there." He leaned down on the desk, frozen-eyed, unmoving. I went over to the door and opened it and looked back at him. His eyes had followed me, but his lean gray body had not moved. There was hate in his eyes. I went out and through the hedge and up the hill to my car and got into it. I turned it around and drove up over the crest. Nobody shot at me. After a few blocks I turned off, cut the motor, and sat for a few moments. Nobody followed me either. I drove back into Hollywood.